It is 1961.
A team of Italian archaeologists is working at a site in Caesarea Maritima, the old Roman capital of the Judea province, on the coast of what is now Israel.
They are excavating the ruins of a Roman theater. Dusty work. Slow work.
The kind of work where most days you find nothing. Then one of them turns over a block of limestone. It is being used as a step, a building material, reused, unremarkable. But on the underside, there is an inscription.
Carved in Latin.
The block has been repurposed, the inscription facing inward, hidden for nearly 2,000 years.
They clean it. They photograph it. They translate it. And they read a name. We will come back to that name.
But first, stay with me.
Because here is what most people do not know.
Most people who argue about whether Jesus was real have never actually read what the ancient world wrote about him. They argue from assumptions. They argue from YouTube comments. They argue from vibes.
This is not a theological debate. This is not a sermon.
This is not about what you believe or what your church taught you.
This is what 7 non-Christian ancient writers, Roman senators, Jewish historians, Greek satirists, Syrian philosophers put down in ink within 150 years of Jesus' death.
These were not his followers. Several of them actively despised his followers.
And they still wrote his name. That is what we are talking about today. There are 7 major non-biblical sources that mention Jesus or his immediate circle. 7.
And the majority of historians, including scholars who are not Christian, not religious, and in at least one famous case openly hostile to Christianity, accept that Jesus of Nazareth was a real historical person who lived in 1st century Judea, preached publicly, gathered followers, and was executed by Rome. This is not a question most serious historians are still debating.
The debate is happening on social media, not in the universities.
Here is the first source. And it comes from a man who had every reason to stay silent.
Publius Cornelius Tacitus was born around the year 56.
He became one of Rome's greatest historians, a senator, a consul, a man of the establishment. He wrote his masterwork, the Annals, around the year 116. And in the 15th book, in the 44th section, he is describing a catastrophe.
The year is 64. Rome is burning.
The Great Fire of Rome destroyed 10 of the city's 14 districts.
People were running. Buildings collapsed.
The smoke was visible for miles. And Emperor Nero needed a scapegoat. He chose the Christians.
Tacitus was not writing to defend them. He despised them.
He called their faith a destructive superstition. His exact Latin phrase was exiciabilis superstitio, a lethal superstition, a deadly cult. He had nothing but contempt for the movement. And yet he wrote this. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate, and a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome.
Read that again. Tacitus is not a Christian.
He is a Roman senator writing a history of Rome. He drops the name Christus and the name Pontius Pilate as established facts. He does not argue their existence. He does not cite sources. He states them the way you state that fire is hot.
For a Roman historian of Tacitus' reputation to invent a fictional Jewish preacher as a plot device would be extraordinary.
Historians have examined this passage for centuries.
The overwhelming consensus, it is authentic. Now you might think fine, one Roman.
But he was writing 60 years after Jesus died.
Maybe he got it wrong. Maybe he was repeating a rumor. Fair objection.
Hold that thought. Because around the same time, a different Roman was writing a letter to the emperor himself. Gaius Plinius Caecilius Secundus, better known as Pliny the Younger, was the governor of the Roman province of Bithynia in what is now northern Turkey.
The year is approximately 112.
He is writing to Emperor Trajan, asking for guidance on how to handle a problem, Christians.
And here is what makes his letter extraordinary. Pliny tortured 2 women to find out what Christianity was.
2 slave women who served as deaconesses in the local church. He applied Roman judicial torture, the kind reserved for slaves in legal proceedings.
He needed to know, was this a criminal cult? What did he find? Nothing criminal.
In his own words, the Christians met before dawn, sing hymns to Christ as to a god, and bound themselves by an oath to commit no crimes, no theft, no adultery, no fraud.
Pliny was frustrated. He was not writing to praise Christianity.
He was writing to a Roman emperor asking what to do with these people who refused to curse Christ even under threat of death.
Here's what most people miss about these 2 witnesses. Tacitus and Pliny are not sympathetic to Christians.
They are, by their own words, hostile or indifferent.
And hostile witnesses are the most valuable witnesses.
A man with nothing to gain and everything to lose by admitting something still admits it, that is the most credible testimony there is. Both men write as though the historical facts about Jesus are already established.
Christus existed. He was executed under Pilate. His followers have been meeting secretly for decades. This is not breaking news to them.
This is background information they are providing to explain a social problem they are dealing with right now.
That is what authentic historical reference looks like. We have 2 Roman witnesses.
But before we get to the most surprising source of all, an atheist New Testament scholar who spent years trying to prove Jesus was a myth and ended up writing a book defending his existence, I want to ask you something.
If you have found this useful, subscribe. Not for the algorithm. Because we have more of this coming. More archaeology. More history.
More of the material your church probably skipped over because they assumed you were not ready for it.
You are ready for it. Okay. Let us keep going.
Because the next witness is the most complicated and the most contested.
Titus Flavius Josephus was born in Jerusalem in the year 37, just a few years after the crucifixion.
He was a Jewish priest, a military commander, and eventually a historian employed by Rome.
He wrote for a Roman audience.
He was trying to explain Jewish history and culture to people who had just destroyed Jerusalem.
He had every political incentive to distance himself from any association with Jesus or Christianity.
Christians were considered a troublesome sect.
Associating his history with their founder would have been a liability.
And yet in his work Antiquities of the Jews, written around the year 93, there is a passage.
It is called the Testimonium Flavianum, the testimony of Josephus.
And it is one of the most debated passages in ancient history. Here is the problem: the version that exists in our manuscript says things a Jew would never write. It calls Jesus the Christ. It says he appeared to his followers after 3 days. These are Christian claims, not Jewish historical observations. Most scholars agree that a later Christian scribe, probably in the 3rd or 4th century, added those phrases.
Doctored the text. Improved it, from their perspective. Pay attention to this.
Because here is what scholars also agree on: strip out the obvious additions, and there is a core passage that is original Josephus.
The wording around it is consistent with his style. The structure makes sense.
And the passage does not read like a full Christian confession, it reads like a historian briefly noting a controversial figure. What many scholars reconstruct as the original reads something like this: around this time there lived Jesus, a wise man. He performed surprising feats and taught those who accept the truth gladly.
He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks.
When Pilate, upon hearing him accused by men of the highest standing among us, had condemned him to be crucified, those who had in the first place come to love him did not give up their affection for him. And the tribe of Christians, so called after him, has still to this day not disappeared.
That is the reconstructed core. No Christian interpolations. Just Josephus. But there is a second passage in Josephus that has no controversy at all.
In Antiquities, Book 20, Chapter 9, Verse 1, Josephus is describing the execution of James, an important leader in Jerusalem ordered by the high priest Ananus. And Josephus identifies James as the brother of Jesus who was called Christ. No scholar disputes this passage.
The language is Josephus's own style. There are no signs of later editing. James, the brother of a man called Christ, executed by a high priest whose cruelty even Josephus criticizes. One casual mention. In passing.
And that single phrase anchors Jesus to the historical record in a way that needs no defense.
But it gets stranger. Because now we leave Rome and Judea entirely. We travel east, to Syria.
And we find a man writing from prison.
Mara bar Serapion was a Syrian Stoic philosopher.
He is not a Christian.
He is not Jewish.
He is a pagan intellectual writing a letter to his son from a Roman prison sometime in the late 1st or early 2nd century. He is reflecting on the cost of wisdom, how history treats those who dare to know more than the powerful.
And he writes this. What did the Athenians gain from killing Socrates? Famine and plague came upon them in retribution. And the people of Samos for burning Pythagoras? In a moment their land was covered with sand. And the Jews for killing their wise king?
They lost their kingdom and were scattered to every land.
Their wise king. He does not name Jesus.
But the reference is clear, a wise leader of the Jews who was killed, after which Jerusalem fell and the Jewish people were scattered.
That sequence fits Jesus and the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD perfectly.
A Syrian pagan Stoic, writing to his son from a Roman prison, referred to Jesus as a wise king without naming him, without believing in him, and without any apparent awareness that he was writing something future generations would still be reading.
That is remarkable. There is one more Roman source. A quick one. But it matters more than people realize. Gaius Suetonius Tranquillus was a Roman biographer who wrote lives of the 12 Caesars around the year 121.
In his biography of Emperor Claudius, he writes that Claudius expelled the Jews from Rome because of constant disturbances on account of Christus.
Christus. Not Christus.
But the spelling variation is common in ancient Latin manuscripts. The letters E and I were often interchanged in names of foreign origin. Most historians read this as a reference to Jesus and to arguments that were breaking out in Rome's Jewish community about whether Jesus was the Messiah.
You might not notice why that matters immediately. But Luke does.
In Acts chapter 18, Luke mentions that Priscilla and Aquila had recently left Rome because Claudius had expelled the Jews.
Luke records this as a historical footnote, not even trying to prove it.
He did not know that 2,000 years later a Roman biographer would confirm the detail in a separate document.
That kind of quiet, unplanned corroboration is what historians call convergent testimony.
Two sources, written for completely different audiences, with no apparent coordination, agreeing on a historical event.
And now we come back to the stone. 1961, Caesarea Maritima.
The limestone block that Italian archaeologists pulled from the ruins of a Roman theater. They cleaned the dust from it.
They read the inscription. And here, in carved Latin, they found a dedication to Emperor Tiberius. Tiberium. Pontius Pilatus. Prefectus Iudae. Pontius Pilate. Prefect of Judea. This is now known as the Pilate Stone. It is currently in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem.
And it is the only physical, archaeological evidence of Pontius Pilate that has ever been found.
Think about what that means.
For centuries, skeptics argued that Pontius Pilate might be a legend, a name added to the story later to give it historical credibility.
He appeared in the Gospels. He appeared in Tacitus. But no physical evidence.
Then a limestone step proved them wrong.
Pilate was real. The man Tacitus names as the one who executed Christus was real. His name is in stone. In Latin. In a Roman theater. And Jesus of Nazareth, executed under his authority. That sequence is now confirmed by independent archaeological evidence from a completely unexpected source. Now here is the part that I think matters most. Bart Ehrman is a professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He is one of the most prominent New Testament scholars alive. He is also a self-described agnostic. A former evangelical Christian who studied the Gospels, found what he believes are contradictions and historical errors, and left the faith. He is not your ally if you are looking for someone to confirm your theology. In 2012, Ehrman wrote a book called Did Jesus Exist? He was not writing it to defend Christianity. He was writing it because a growing number of people, mostly online, were arguing that Jesus was entirely fictional, a myth invented by early Christians. Ehrman found this argument intellectually embarrassing. In his own words, the view that Jesus existed is held by virtually every expert on the planet. He spends 360 pages tearing apart the mythicist arguments. Not because he believes Jesus was God. He does not. But because he is a historian. And as a historian, he finds the evidence overwhelming. This is not a small thing. When the scholar who has spent his career questioning the reliability of the Gospels tells you that Jesus was a real person, that is not a faith claim. That is a historical judgment made by someone with every reason to land on the other side. This is not a rumor. This is not a legend preserved by devoted followers. This is not a story that survived because no one checked. This is a man whose name was written down by Roman senators who hated his movement, Jewish historians who had every reason to ignore him, Syrian philosophers who had never met a Christian, and a 21st century agnostic scholar who tried his hardest to find the myth and couldn't. History kept his name. So here is what you actually know now. 7 non-Christian ancient sources: Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, Josephus twice, Suetonius, Lucian of Samosata, Mara bar Serapion mention Jesus or his immediate followers within 150 years of his death. None of them are writing to convert you. Most of them are writing to explain a problem, a curiosity, or a historical event. They mention Jesus the way you mention a background detail as established fact. The Pilate stone confirmed what Tacitus wrote. The expulsion of Jews from Rome confirmed what Luke wrote in Acts. The quiet, undisputed mention in Josephus' Book 20 confirmed what the longer passage was arguing. This does not prove that Jesus was God. That is a different question entirely, one that history cannot answer, because it is not a historical question. That question belongs to faith. And faith is not irrational for going beyond what evidence can settle. But here is what it means for you. If you believe in Jesus, you are not clinging to a myth. You are not defending a fairy tale invented in a backroom 2 centuries after the fact. You are talking about a man who lived in a specific century, in a specific province, under a specific governor whose name is carved in stone in Jerusalem right now. Real people who hated his movement wrote about him anyway. Real historians with no stake in the story referenced him in passing, the way you reference background facts you do not think anyone will question. You are defending a man who walked in history. And that is a different kind of ground to stand on. Which of these 7 ancient sources surprised you most? Tell me below. I read every comment and I want to know which one landed for you. The limestone block is in a museum in Jerusalem. You can go see it. Pontius Pilate's name, in Latin, in stone, from the 1st century. And the man he executed, history has been arguing about him ever since. 2,000 years later, the argument is still going. That should tell you something.